Welcome to the Human Experience Podcast, the only podcast designed to fuse your left and right brain hemispheres and feed it the most entertaining and mentally engaging topics on the planet. As we approach our ascent, please make sure your frontal, temporal and occipital lobes are in their full upright position. As you take your seat of consciousness, relax your senses and allow us to take you on a journey. We are the Intimate Strangers. Thank you for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We've got a phenomenal program planned for you tonight. We're going to be continuing our series called A Drink with Dr. Dennis McKenna. Dennis is a good friend of the show. He's been on the show many times. I've known Dennis for many years. So sit back, grab a drink, maybe a smoke. Enjoy this conversation. The Human Experience is in session. My name is Xavier Katana. My guest for this evening is Dr. Dennis McKenna. Dr. Dennis McKenna is an ethnopharmacologist who has studied plant hallucinogens for over 40 years. He is the author of many scientific papers and co-author with his brother Terence McKenna. He holds a doctorate from the University of British Columbia. He received postdoctoral research fellowships in the Laboratory of Clinical Pharmacology, National Institute of Mental Health, and in the Department of Neurology, Stanford University School of Medicine. He's the founding board member of the Heffter Research Institute, a nonprofit organization focused on the investigation of the potential therapeutic uses of psychedelic medicines. Dennis, it's a pleasure, my friend. Welcome back to HXP. It's so good to have you back here.
It's a pleasure to be back, Xavier. How are you?
I'm doing well. So we're doing
Very
this.
good.
We're doing this drink with Dr. Dennis McKenna thing again. What are you drinking over there?
Well, I grabbed some white wine, which was the closest thing available.
Okay, I'm drinking some red wine, so we're set with that.
Very good.
You've been pretty busy these days. I mean, I talked to you about a week ago, and you were down in Peru, I think, right?
That's right. Yes, we just finished up 2 retreats down there. That'll be the third retreat of this year that we've done. And so it's keeping me busy. And then we have another one coming up in November, which I think will be a very interesting retreat, not like anything we've done before. We're going to have my friend Alexandre Tanis joining us. He is a specialist in sound therapy, sound resonance, the use of sound in ceremonial space, and probably the world's expert on just about every aspect of sound that you can imagine. I've had experiential sessions with him on many occasions, and he really knows how to use sonics and resonance in conjunction with altered states to produce rather amazing experiential programs, I guess you could say, that many people resonate with. I couldn't resist the pun. But anyway, if you look at my Twitter feed or my Facebook page, you can find information about it. Or you can send an inquiry to events at McKenna.Academy.
Okay, getting that out right away. I mean, since you mentioned it, tell us a little bit more about the Academy, because this is something new that you're doing it. You're calling it the catalytic nexus for the transformation of global consciousness. Wow.
Close, Xavier. We're calling it. It's the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy.
Right.
And it's going to have its operations mostly focused in South America, but not confined to that. And I call it a catalytic nexus for the transformation of global consciousness, in the sense that the programs of the Academy and go beyond just psychedelic retreats or ayahuasca retreats, although we certainly do that. Mm-hmm. But we're offering a variety of educational programs, even courses, other types of programs to help people educate themselves or re-educate themselves about their relationship to nature, which is something that we really need to be thinking about.
Of course.
Because we're all aware of the crisis that we face. So my idea with the Academy is, I guess I'm basically an academician at heart, and I love teaching and I love sharing information. I love bringing brilliant minds to a place where they can share their wisdom and ideas. Mm-hmm. And that's what you do with an academy, right? So this will be our first official event sponsored by the Academy, this one in November, and I'm excited about it. Alexandre is an amazing character, a teacher of mine for many years, and he has so much wisdom and so much knowledge to impart. I think it's going to be a really stimulating 10 days.
And you're designing it as a sort of modern day mystery school. And I mean, you've been doing this yourself for, like 40 years or more. So, and you've been, now it seems like you're starting to take the charge on and take the lead on this with this institution.
Yeah, exactly. I have been doing retreats in the Sacred Valley since basically about 2012. And as we've done those, the concept has evolved. So, as you know, I've been involved with ayahuasca and other psychedelics for, as you say, more than 40 years. Mm-hmm. But it's only in the last, since 2012, a little bit before that I've been doing regular retreats in the Sacred Valley. And this time we decided to take a slightly different direction and not only include the medicine experiences, but also provide a context where people can appreciate the pre-Incan culture and their understanding of sound and altered states. We have one of our faculty members on this upcoming retreat is a guide who we work with in our ayahuasca retreats, who has made us quite an in-depth study of all this and kind of the esoteric energies and technologies that were available to the Incas and the predecessors of the Incas. And a lot of that had to do with the use of sonic energy, sound energy. I mean, sound, basically. But turns out there's a lot more to sound than you might think.
No, I agree with that. I mean, we've had a bunch of authors recently on that, and we've been exploring the history of psychedelic usage through ancient times. It turns out, Plato was on this stuff, Socrates, like a lot of the modern philosophy that we, kind of operate on today and are learning from today was influenced by psychedelics. And if you look at someone like Graham Hancock, he talks about how, ayahuasca or DMT was the reason that these cultures were sort of, collecting and moving around to different parts of the earth. So, and this has been ingrained into our culture for thousands and thousands of years.
Yes. Yeah, good that you mentioned Graham. I've just finished his latest book. I am a total fan of Graham's work.
Yeah.
And his latest book, America Before, have you read it?
Yeah, I got through it. Yeah. I mean, It's a long read. It's like a 500-page book, but it's worth it because he really studies.
It's definitely worth it. He brings more documentation together in this book than he has with any of the previous ones. So he builds a very solid case. And the case, the picture that it gives us of the ancient past is nothing like the conventional view of history or archaeology. I mean, for one thing, it goes back And now, these are not crazy numbers. These are well-documented numbers. In the New World, humans arrived in the New World at least 130,000 years ago, probably much earlier. And so that just completely overturns, the conventional view of when hominids, they weren't even, when humans made it to the New World, and indicates that, they probably didn't come over the land bridge initially. They actually probably crossed the ocean, which is, it just vastly exceeds anything we thought that such ancient races would be able to do. So it's very interesting, his theory that there was a more or less advanced, like not computers and lasers, but more like an 18th century level of civilization. These people had, ocean-going ships, basically, and they had, writing. They were cartographers, and they actually generated maps of parts of the world that for years were not even known, to the Western world, not admitted at that time. So, and you've read the book, so you know all this.
I mean, why, Dennis, do you think then, for us publicly, why has the history of this been hidden? Why are psychedelics, namely, plant medicines, so demonized in mainstream culture, mainstream media? I mean, the 1990s, you've got the Just Say No campaign, Nancy Reagan doing her whole speech. I mean, the war on drugs. Why suppress this technology if it's been around for so long?
Well, I think it's numerous factors. I mean, for one thing, psychedelics are dangerous because not because they're dangerous substances, but because they make you have dangerous ideas. Unorthodox ideas, and the powers that be are never receptive to that. They don't really want people to make their own discoveries and think for themselves because they have an agenda. You're supposed to accept a certain societal or religious or other, sets of dogma, and if you insist on thinking for yourself and push back against the conventional wisdom, as something like Graham's work does, and it's very well done. It's very well documented. So you can't really fault it in terms of being sloppy scholarship or anything like that. Why are people so threatened by it? I'm not sure. It's because there's a certain narrative that we've accepted for a long time. For instance, the idea that, humans originated in Africa, they moved out of Africa, thence into Europe and Asia, the possibility that they might have reached the so-called New World much earlier than anyone imagined. I don't know why people are threatened by it. I mean, I think that science, if it purports to call itself a science, should be looking for the truth, but I think something that Graham's work and the fact that he has been so denounced by the so-called archaeological community, and as he makes very clear, it's because it's not a science anymore. It's a cult. It's become a set of accepted doctrines and views of ancient history that that are not to be challenged. And so he comes along and challenges it, and he makes a lot of people mad. But I think anyone who's curious, and who is really honest, can't review what Graham has written, can't look at that in an objective way and say, wait a minute, the picture that we thought we had of the ancient past, it just does not fit.
Right.
These new facts that have come to light.
Yeah.
And to me, that's exciting, but I'm not a dogmatist, I'm not invested in some set of dogma, and academics is, unfortunately, I mean, it's a notoriously sort of hidebound institution. It's not generally open to new ideas because it threatens the status quo.
Have you ever had your tenure threatened with any of your work?
Well, threatened in what sense?
I mean, I don't know. Have you ever received pushback from, exploring psychedelics and plants in the way that you do?
Not really.
Okay. That's a good thing to hear.
It's been surprising. I mean, I've not gotten, death threats or anything like that.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people disagree with me.
Sure.
And they're free to do that. That's what what free and fair dialogue is about. In fact, my whole shtick is don't believe me. I mean, I'm not asking to be believed. I'm asking or suggesting people should think for themselves, and they should use these God-given brains that we have to, figure it out, come to your own conclusions. That's the one thing that's quite attractive and beautiful about psychedelics, because, you don't have to accept any set of dogma. You don't have to have faith. You can just have the experience. It does not take faith or belief to benefit from psychedelics. What it takes is courage, and if you have the courage to smoke the pipe or drink the cup or whatever it is you do and actually trust yourself enough to have that experience, then you can decide for yourself what it means, and that's an important thing. Any powerful spiritual technology, there are legions of people who are ready to tell you what it's supposed to mean, and how you're supposed to think about it. What I like about psychedelics is it gives you the opportunity. I mean, you can listen to those people. There are lots of people ready to tell you how to interpret this and so on. But in the end of the day, it's the encounter between you and the medicine, and whatever the medicine renders accessible to you. And so, it throws you back on itself, on yourself, and it basically throws down a challenge. Like, here's something that's going to completely blow your mind, and it's going to completely, disrupt your reference frame, right? And what you thought you knowed. And it's your job to make of it what you will, interpret it according to what, trust yourself enough to interpret it for yourself. You can benefit from reading about other people's experiences. You can benefit from people's, thoughts about, what it's really about and so on. But at the end of the day, you have to, you just have to draw your own conclusions.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's a good thing. Yeah.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about what occurs in the brain when a substance like DMT or psilocybin or those, 4 compounds, LSD, iboga, what's happening in the brain as far as neuroreceptors and neurogenesis? Because I think in the 90s, there was this idea that the brain was a sort of, like closed system. Like once you burned off this gray matter, once you burned off brain cells, they never regrew back, and that was it. It lowered your IQ. Yeah. You were just dumb for doing this stuff. Yeah. And then I'm not sure what year it was, the early 2000s, maybe 2004, neurogenesis, the idea of neuroplasticity came out, where this understanding of the brain and its flexibility. And I mean, we really don't know much about the brain at all. So, why are these compounds, namely DMT, psilocybin, what impacts are they having on the brain? Why are they so crucial to, mystical experiences and learning and evolution?
we're going to be here all night, Xavier, if we go too deeply into this. But, what you're talking about, basically the compounds that you named, DMT, psilocybin, mescaline, LSD, ayahuasca, these things are what we think of as the classical psychedelics, right? There are plenty of psychoactive substances, plants, and so on that are psychoactive, and some will induce profoundly altered states of consciousness, but they are, strictly speaking, in the pharmacological sense, they're not psychedelics. And I kind of adhere to almost a reductionist definition of psychedelics, because just as an arbitrary thing, under my definition, the definition of a lot of people, and the definition that I like, simply because it kind of defines it, is the true psychedelics, the classic psychedelics, are what they call 5-HT2A agonists, right? Mm-hmm. So what's 5-HT? 5-HT is 5-hydroxytryptamine. It's serotonin, right? One of the neurotransmitters. So one important neurotransmitter in mediating states of consciousness. So you could call them the serotonin 2A receptors. And the 2A receptors are the target for these classic psychedelics. There are about 14 or 15 different kinds of serotonin receptors. Mm-hmm. They have numerous functions all over the body. There's more serotonin receptors in the gut than in the brain. But the 2A receptors appear to be those receptors that are critical to the action of psychedelics, and having these mystical experiences and all that goes with that, this neurogenesis phenomenon, this sort of, the altered state itself, the psychedelic experience itself rearranges connections in the brain, that neuroplasticity thing that you're talking about. And it creates new connections and probably does, in fact, induce neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons.
Right.
Now, as you say, a few years ago, we thought that was just forbidden, right? Like, it just didn't happen. Once you had a given complement of neurons at birth, you only lost neurons after that. It was a long, slow, from birth to death, a long, slow state of neurodegeneration. That's not the current picture at all. The brain is enormously adaptive. It's plastic, and it responds to a stimuli from its environment, and it can actually change its structure, can change its wiring, can change a lot of things about how it operates, and that's in relation to environmental cues. And if you reflect a moment, you think, it's like it's obvious, right? How could it be otherwise? And these models that we created just overlooked something very important, which is that, especially in primates, especially in hominids with our, big brains. I mean, it is because of our enormous brains and the adaptability that brings about that we are such a successful species.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
So when we're defining intelligence, I mean, how are we looking at, what is intelligence? What do we mean when we talk about intelligence? Because pre-hominids, I mean, were they capable of, learning and reasoning? And, are we as well? Are plants intelligent? I mean, there's something happening there, and I'm trying to understand better what that means, what that relationship is. Like, why drinking a cup of ayahuasca tea is opening, this mystical experience for me and helping me on my journey through life.
Well, because it happens to activate those receptors, that network of serotonin 2A receptors and other receptors. Nothing in the brain happens in isolation, but it happens to activate that network that mediates this kind of experience. I mean, that's really all it is. And then, a more maybe important question is why? What is the value of mystical experience to our existence, to our consciousness, to our adaptation to the environment? And that's a deeper question. And I don't know that anyone knows the answer, but what we can say is that, the notion that essentially that the universe is full of mystery and meaning. I mean, that's the that's the consequence of these mystical experiences. If you look at the data, if you look at people in the psilocybin studies, who with terminal cancer, for example, they take psilocybin and it completely reframes their reference frame. Many of these people are terrified of dying because, in fact, they are dying. And, that's all they can think about. But then with the psilocybin as an aid to sort of step outside their reference frame and examine their existential situation, they come away with a tremendously beneficial sort of re-understanding of their situation, which can easily be put in. Many of them say, well, I was terrified of dying, but guess what? I'm alive now, and I'm going to focus on that going forward. The fact that I am alive now in the moment. Everybody dies. Sooner or later, we all have to face that. What use does it do to just focus on that and get all depressed about it? Better to focus on the fact that you're alive now, and you're with your loved ones and you're more or less functional, but definitely, on the way out. But it helps to come to terms with that. So I think, and what keeps coming up again and again in these studies, to kind of get back to what you were saying, is the term meaningful. People say this was the most meaningful experience of my life, or the fifth among the top 5 most meaningful experience of my life. What is so valuable? What's so important about having meaningful experiences?
Right. I mean, why should we even care? Who cares?
Why should we care? Well, but obviously we do. I mean, our whole lives, most of our lives are, routine. I mean, it's not that they're not enjoyable and that sort of thing, but they're not these profound spiritual revelations most of the time. They're more or less routine. People long for something beyond that. I think they long for reassurance that, we are not the limited beings that we appear to be. And the psychedelic experience, or spontaneous mystical experience for that matter, brings it to people and brings people an experience of something beyond themselves. And so it's meaningful. It's because I think it's reassuring. Doesn't even matter if it's true. It does and it doesn't. But, it's true in that you experience it, and I think it's safe. I think it's not inaccurate to say that anything you experience is true because you experience it, to the extent that it's an experience. Whether it has an objective reality, well, then we don't know. But people have these experiences and they are personally meaningful for them. And somehow we really value that. We, in fact, many people with a mystical inclination, they spend years trying to, achieve that kind of a reward. So it's interesting that, pretty much any schmuck can have this kind of experience, 25 milligrams of psilocybin in the right set and setting, and you're pretty much there, and so people say, well, that's not a real mystical experience, because you took a drug, right? You took a drug, and so it can't be genuine. I'm here to tell you that every state of consciousness is reflected by a neurochemical set of a neurochemical brain state.
Sure.
We're on drugs, we're made out of drugs, and we're on drugs all the time. Any kind of experience that we have is a drug-induced experience. Because our brains are engines that run on neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are drugs. So this idea that, well, it's not a real experience because you took a drug, I don't buy it. If you experienced it, it's real. If it's meaningful, who's going to tell you that it's not meaningful? That's for you to decide. That's your judgment. It's not for anybody to tell you that it wasn't meaningful. You can say, well, gee, felt pretty meaningful to me. Mm-hmm. That's all that matters.
I mean, there's something that Graham said when he was on the show that really struck me is, when you're in the Amazon, there's 100,000 plus species of plants, and to realize that there are these two plants that, when combined together, create this brew that creates this experience, it indicates that there was a science that was active, in this ancient period a long time ago. So an awareness or a cognition of how this could affect, us. What do you make of that? I mean, how does that fit into the larger perspective of where we are now?
Well, I think it's easy to look at this in a simplistic way, and it's not quite the way you described it. In the first place, in the 80,000 or so species that we think are in the Amazon,
okay,
out of a total of about 260,000 species of plants worldwide. Mm-hmm. I think in the Amazon has about a third of them, maybe 85,000 species. The fact is that most of these plants are full of biodynamic compounds, and DMT, right, is the one that gives ayahuasca its psychedelic kick. There are certain admixture plants that are prepared with ayahuasca, and the vine, as you know, is an monoamine oxidase inhibitor that prevents the breakdown of DMT in the gut and makes it orally active, right? Mm-hmm. Many, many plants contain DMT. It is not a rare compound. It's not rare in the Amazon. It's not rare anywhere.
It's even indigenous in the human body, right?
It's endogenous in the human body. That's right. It is, in fact, a neurotransmitter in the human body. We don't understand its function as well as something like serotonin, but it appears that it is a neurotransmitter. And because DMT is only 2 steps away from tryptophan, right? Tryptophan is an amino acid universal in all organisms. It's one of the 20 that go into proteins. 2 trivial enzymatic steps will convert tryptophan to DMT. So it's very, very common in plants, and animals and fungi probably, and certainly fungi have their own tryptamine derivatives like the psilocybin. So it's common, and there are many plants that conceivably could have been used to make ayahuasca. And in fact, people do. They make analogs of ayahuasca, because the other component of the brew is the vine, which contains the beta carbolines that do the MAO inhibition. But again, beta carbolines, they're not as abundant in nature as DMT, but they're certainly not that rare either. So potentially, ayahuasca or ayahuasca analogs could have been made from completely different plants. And you, in fact, do that. You can do that. Mm-hmm. And with a little knowledge of botany and what we know now, a little bit of knowledge of chemistry and what's been published, you can expect to be quite successful. You can make an ayahuasca analog that will be every bit as active as ayahuasca. But how did this come about back in the day? Well, most likely it just came about through trial and error experimentation, but not random, not necessarily random experimentation. When we did this conference, this ESPD 50 conference a couple of years ago, there was an archaeologist, ethnobotanist there, Manuel Torres, who gave an excellent talk about the probable origins of ayahuasca. And he was talking about a particular area in where Colombia, Venezuela, and Peru come together, the northern Guapes region. And there was a very active chicha technology, making beers of various kinds. And beers are fermented beverages that you make from roots, or usually from roots like manioc. You can make them from fruits sometimes. These are just basically a fermentation technology, right? But the people that made these chichas, they were curious, and they were in in an environment where there were these other plants. Some of them had medicinal uses, including ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, the vine, was used by itself, not as part of a hallucinogenic brew, but probably as a treatment for parasites or something like that. But, human beings have gotten to where we have with respect to plants and the way that we exploit plants because we're curious, and you can see much the same kind of curiosity in operation in a modern day craft brewer. A craft brewer is always looking for new stuff, new ingredients to put in his beers, right? To make them taste different, or to make something that the other guy doesn't have. And there's innovation that goes on. Maybe if I put some of this in, it'll make it taste different, give it a different effect. Manolo makes the point that there was a lot of that going on in this area at that time. And he thinks that, that ayahuasca really sort of appeared out of that, that atmosphere of experimentation, just trying out different combinations and seeing how it was. And then at some point they tried the right combination, and they got their minds blown. So that was a successmic experiment, and yeah. So I think maybe that's how it might have taken off.
I mean, is there a specific role that has been identified for the existence of DMT in humans and nature? It seems kind of like it's a bit elusive as to why, it even exists. I mean, I'm going to get a little woo here about this, but I mean, is it a molecule that connects us into some hyper dimension, some next level of reality, perhaps, that we don't see every.
Sorry, I was pulling up the distracted. So the question is, what does it mean?
It seems like the role of DMT in humans and nature.
Yes, I can. Okay. I don't know what happened.
Neither do I. It seems like the role of DMT in humans and nature seems elusive to me. It's like this access to this mystical realm or compound mystical space, this hyperdimension that we're accessing when we ingest this compound. Do you have any theories about that? Is there something specific about the molecule that could result in, discovering more about why it's so important or why it has this effect that it has?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer. I mean, you take DMT, you have this experience, you seem to be in this parallel reality in a certain sense. You could call it, you appear to encounter entities, other intelligences in that space that don't appear to be you or anything like you. But you have to remember, you're bringing your interpretive frameworks to this, you know. And just because that's what it appears to be doesn't mean that's what it is, you know. And you know, it's difficult to resist the temptation to say, well, it opened a portal into another dimension. Certainly, you know, that may be our subjective impression, and maybe it does. But how do you test that? You know, I mean, you know, I can be a wet blanket, and I can say, well, you know, certain, like, dopamine is a neurotransmitter, it will have these effects. You know, serotonin is a neurotransmitter, it will have other effects. DMT is a neurotransmitter. Maybe it's just that when you smoke DMT, this is what happens. You know, and it's a reflection of brain architecture, brain chemistry, maybe, rather than any other dimension.
So are you saying that the spiritual context that some cultures add to the experience of DMT could be just, you know, just that, their interpretation of something, an event? Like, I was watching a lecture that you gave today, and you were talking about this culture in the Amazon that, you know, valued the purge that happens when you drink ayahuasca, and they thought that it was like some sort of energetic release, you know, like an energy leaving your body. So, you know, these cultures identify with some sort of spiritual aspect to this compound, and, you know, so I mean, that's why I mean, you're the scientist, so of course you would say, you know, it's just in the brain. But I'm wondering if it, you know, if it has a spiritual, something else context.
Well, yes, of course, but it's not the drug that has the spiritual aspect; it's the experience.
Is
right?
it all the
drug does is trigger that. Your experience has spiritual aspects to it. The drug seems to facilitate that experience, but you know, this goes back to, you know, I think a mistake that a lot of people made back in the day. I certainly made it. This idea that somehow the trip is in the drug. You know, it's not. It doesn't work that way. You know, the drug is simply a molecule. It has the effects that it has when you mix it with a human nervous system. You know, the nervous system. You can think of the drug in some way is like a musical score, you know. Yeah. I mean, and the instrument that plays it is the brain, actually the brain body. Mm-hmm. You know, when you put it into that biochemical soup and it goes through its pharmacokinetics, it goes through its metabolism, the symphony plays out. And the symphony is what you experience as the psychedelic experience. The drug on the shelf is simply a crystal on a shelf. It doesn't have any of these properties. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a trigger. It's a catalyst that lets the nervous system express itself in this way. Now, you know, so then you can take this totally, you know, sort of subjective experience, say, well, it's all in my head. You know, there is no extra dimension. There is no portal to parallel universes or anything like that. It's just a subjective experience. You know, it's like a dream. Mm-hmm. You know, but then, so you say, okay, well, there's nothing to it beyond that. But, you know, you're getting into some difficult epistemological territory, because really, what else is there but the hallucination, the experience that our brains synthesize and present to us as reality? You know, I mean, is there anything beyond that? It maybe not, but it's very hard to it's very hard to objectively know about it because we're caged, we're trapped, or trapped is a bad term because it implies that, we're constrained, but in some ways we are inside of this neural hallucination that we create for ourselves and that we inhabit. It's a model of reality. I've very often said this, our brains construct a model of reality, essentially a hallucination that we proceed to inhabit. So we're living out our own movie all the time. We're not really directly experiencing reality. We know enough to be pretty sure that there's something out there that's not the self, but we never experience that directly.
I really connect with your idea of, like when you look at a musical sheet on a piece of paper, that's all it is just writing on these notes on a piece of paper. But then when you apply the instrument and you play the music, then you're adding it to this extra dimension of, time and space. So perhaps the psychedelic experience is the same way. The molecule DMT is just that. It's just a molecule, but when ingested and the brain being the instrument, that's when it allows us to play inside this reality that we're creating, for ourselves.
That's exactly it. So it plays out through time. To play the musical score with an instrument brings it to life. It expresses it as a fourth dimensional object, or a fourth dimensional, not object, but process. Same thing. The drug, in the absence of the instrument to play it, which is our brains, is pretty inert and frankly fairly boring. But once you put it in the right context, then it plays in fourth dimension. And of course, we are fourth dimensional entities, because we're, you look at a person and they appear to be solid, and they are, but they're a process. The fact that they're alive means they're metabolizing, and metabolism is something that expresses through time. So that's the fourth dimensional aspect of personhood. When metabolism ceases, then there's not much to talk about because the person is dead, right? Mm-hmm. So we normally don't think of these things. We operate within a set of these assumptions, not really thinking too much about what, about these interpretative structures that we put onto it. But when you actually sort of focus in on those, then you have to admit to yourself there's all sorts of assumptions about the nature of reality, the nature of your own experience, and this comes up again and again with the notion that, for example, encountering apparently non-human intelligences in the psychedelic state, are these entities real, or are they fabrications of your own imagination, or are they, in that sense, are they a part of yourself, that is presenting as something that isn't the self? So these are tricky questions, right. And we don't normally think about them. We use all these terms, without really thinking about them.
It's a mystery. That's part of the mystery aspect of it. And the question is too big for us to really understand and answer definitively, right? Can we accept that?
Well, so far.
Right.
Right.
And what about at the moment of, cardiac arrest, the moment of death? And is there any relevance or truth to this idea that there's this surge of DMT that's being generated at the moment of cardiac arrest?
It's very possible that there is. It would not be surprising. You're probably thinking of E.D. Frexka's work on this.
Mm-hmm. And is
yeah.
it just a neuroprotective function? Is it just
Well, that's enough, right? It is in fact neuroprotective. It's a very good antioxidant, and if you're having a ischemic attack, a stroke, essentially. If the body can mobilize those stores of DMT in the lungs and they're actively transported into the brain, then they would have this neuroprotective effect. They would prevent the degeneration of the neurons through hypoxia, through lack of oxygen. They would buy some time, and it's perfectly reasonable. In fact, that the body would have these protective reactions to that kind of event. A stroke probably mobilizes all kinds of responses, but that might be one of the responses is the mobilization of massive amounts of DMT. Now, the fact that this might also induce a profound psychedelic state may have nothing to do with the fact that it's neuroprotective and it's saving your life, but it's kind of a benefit. It's kind of a convenient side effect because you're, how you go to you go to the dentist and they put the television on, so you won't pay attention to what they're doing in there.
Sure,
well, it
right.
may be something like that. The body may be saying, well, you can watch the movies while we're trying to, save your brain. And it may not have any meaning beyond that.
Interesting. Now, Dennis, I really want to get into like the ecological nightmare that we're in. I was reading this article. Do you remember this movie that came out several years ago? It was by M. Night Shyamalan. I think it was called The Happening, where these plants start releasing this compound that makes humans commit suicide or something like that. It was a really out there movie.
I haven't seen it.
It's interesting. And it was like the Earth was protecting itself because humans were killing it. And I read this article out of Reuters, and I guess this U.S.-led team of scientists were drilling into the Arctic, and they found that they found a bunch of plastic they drilled down into the core of the Earth, and they, in the remotest waters on the planet, found pieces of plastic there. So, this is an ecological nightmare that we're in the middle of, and it seems like people don't care. Do they? Until it's at their front door, do people really? There's some of us that care, but for the masses, do they care about what's happening with Earth? I don't think so. I don't think they care. I think until if it affects their lives directly, maybe it affects the price of gas, then they start to complain.
Then they start to care. That's right. Well, I think a lot of them don't know about it, and there is a very active disinformation campaign to keep people distracted and to keep their attention away from, these ecological processes, which are actually threatening the existence of our species, certainly, and maybe all of life on Earth. I don't get it, Xavier. It's some kind of a cognitive dissonance, where, the real consequences of what we're doing to the planet are so horrible. They're too much to contemplate in some ways. And so people, naturally they retreat into denial. But denial is not going to fix the problem. And, and I've often said these plants and experiences that they can catalyze are a wake-up call. In that sense, I do think that the community of species in the biosphere is intelligent. And I think that these plants are like ambassadors of the community of species. They just happen to make these neurotransmitter-like messenger molecules that impact our nervous system in these particular ways and help us to wake up to the crisis that we face. The question is, what happens when you wake up? What's the next step? Well, it's not so clear. In part, the mission becomes we have to get everybody woken up. Mm-hmm. And then maybe we can come to a consensus about what to do about it, if anything. It may be that it's too late, that we're so far beyond any remediation that we could take for this kind of thing that, I'm not sure that the solution is a human-originated solution at this point. We can stop to some degree. We can try to stop what we're doing to, not compound the damage. They say when you're digging a hole, the first thing you do is stop digging.
Right.
If we could do that literally, then we might be able to turn it around. But, every time a new report comes out on the climate, how rapidly it's changing and so on, the time frame becomes shorter. And so, a few years ago it was that we had 30 years, now maybe 20 years, maybe only 10 years. The window is becoming shorter and shorter. Are we going to wake up? I think that's the question.
Wow.
Are we going to wake up? And if we wake up, will it be too late? What can we do to mitigate this? And, I don't really know.
Terrence was talking a lot about this before he died.
Yeah.
And he was really big on this. And it didn't connect back then. And I think I agree with you. I think it might be too late. I've read the studies on this. I've really dug into this, and I'm not sure there's a practical solution. We supposedly hit peak oil, I think in the 90s, and we're still dependent on fossil fuels. There's just not enough happening. There's not enough awareness. There's not enough taking place that is, counter indicating that something is going to shift in our favor. And so if it's too late for, humanity, so be it. Humans, they seem to do this, wherever they go, is they take from their environment and take. And so it's a process of destroying, the ecology that's around them. And I find that fascinating. I find it, fascinating that we can't find an equilibrium or a harmony within ourselves, the way we live, and the earth, the home, the planet that we exist on.
Right. We can't, and we don't. And it's dismaying. I think a lot of this, as I've often said, is a reflection of the sort of poison, the poison that has seeped into Western consciousness, particularly the West, but really it's a human disease. But this perception that we're not part of nature and that we own it, it exists to serve us. Mm-hmm. And that sort of top-down hierarchical perspective is what's gotten us into this mess that we're in, because we think that nature exists only to be depleted and exploited. Nature probably disagrees with that. It has its own program. And I don't worry so much about the survival of life on the planet. I think that life is very resilient, and will adapt. There have been massive extinction events at various points in evolutionary history,
Sure.
different cusps, where 95% of all terrestrial life has gone extinct and so on.
Sure.
We shouldn't imagine that can't happen again. We will likely be among the first to go. Life will persist, but it won't be as interesting as we are, it won't be as complex or problematic. After some millions of years, it may re-diversify, and who knows what will replace it. But, we are the problematic species. We're the ones that are putting all this pressure on the equilibrium states that maintain the smooth functioning of the biosphere. We are pushing all those envelopes. At a certain point, it won't be possible for it to snap back. And then we're up the creek without a paddle, as it were. Is it going to happen? I don't know.
It doesn't seem like an if question. Yeah, it seems like a when question to me. It's like, when is it going to occur, not if it's going to occur.
Right.
And who knows? Who knows? Maybe there's a millennial out there that comes up with this really great idea, and it's mainstream, adopted, and maybe maybe corporations back off of this at any cost, profit paradigm that we are in the middle of. And it's not like we have a backup place to go to. There's no.
Not yet. No.
I mean,
there is no other, and there really isn't any place to escape to. In fact, all this talk about putting a colony on the moon, a colony on Mars, in the first place, the time frame for those things is much longer. I mean, we're likely to be confronting this crisis long before we could have any kind of colony on another planet. And I'm sort of irritated by the idea, why does it have to be on a planet? Why don't we try to get ourselves a permanent presence in space? That's where all the energy and material are. That's where more or less infinite resources are.
For sure.
We need to, build space colonies or whatever if we're going to look at a technological solution. I can't see that building another, a settlement on Mars so that we then have another planet to pollute and destroy. What's to be gained in that? In space, you can have all of these fairly dirty processes going on because space is already full of radiation and dust clouds and all of this stuff, So it's if you're a polluting species, space is a good place to do it. Well, within limits, we're already turning near Earth space into a junkyard, much to our detriment. So I don't know. I really don't know.
The Vedas talked about this a little bit, and they described it as like we are in this age of Kali Yuga, the dark age, and these ages last so long, like 150,000 years. But it turns out, someone on Graham Hancock's website actually posted this article that I read recently, and it was talking about how this dark age, that's what it translates to, the Kali Yuga, is supposed to end and shift into this new age around 2025 or so. So we got about 6 years until we see this shift and awareness change in people. And if you look at what's happening politically, it's just in America specifically, but just not just America, but all around the world, people are protesting. Yeah. And everything is so charged up. It seems like we're on the precipice of something huge, something big that could change the course of where we're going and how we're getting there.
Yeah, exactly. Everything seems to be getting destabilized. It's not going to be business as usual. And the question is, there may well be solutions to some of these climate crises. There are technologies that could be solution. People are talking about geoengineering and all that, And on the one hand, this is a radical solution. It's not something that, a few years ago people would consider. But right now, things are going to hell so fast. We might need to implement some some radical measures, and but the problem is it's not that there are not solutions. There are solutions, but the problem is on the policy level. The people who make the policy, who should be stepping up to the plate and saying, look, we have a problem here. We need to have all hands on deck to solve this problem. All hands, this is something that threatens not just the United States or any country. It threatens us as a species. So earthlings need to be responding to this. I don't see that happening. Yeah. I mean, I think, the program of governments, particularly the U.S. government, but as you say, a lot of others seem to be very invested in denial and even making it worse, reversing what pathetic policy initiatives they have made, because, now we don't believe in it, or, Trump says global warming is a hoax, and everyone buys that. Well, it's not, it's not a hoax. And, we live in this environment created by the media where it actually distorts reality. It seems like, because the reality that we inhabit is created out of memes, and the power of social media and all this can propagate these memes, throughout the global consciousness so quickly. Is there anything we can rely on in terms of good information? How do you separate good information from lies and propaganda?
That's a great point. Yeah.
Very hard to know.
Yeah. I mean, have you noticed, Dennis, that people have changed. The world has distinctly changed since this advent of the smartphone. In my encounters with people when I'm out, I don't notice people ever looking up from their phone. They're so completely addicted. It's like they've devolved into these lower species monkeys. There's actually this question that segues into this perfectly. Bandaloop asks, he says, what does Dennis think about Tony Wright's theory on fruit symbiosis being involved in our neural evolution and how humanity is now degenerating back into a typical mammalian brain?
Well, I think there may be something to it. I like Tony Wright's theory. In fact, I wrote the foreword to the first edition of his book, which when it came out was called Left in the Dark. And it just makes sense. To me, Tony's theory just makes sense that we grow up, we evolved in this biodiverse environment. Biodiversity is reflected by chemical diversity. We were pretty much omnivores. We consumed lots of different plants and animals. We consumed a chemically diverse diet. We existed, we lived in a complex chemical ecology, right? So it just makes sense that these plant compounds are going to have an effect on, our neural evolution, on many aspects of our evolution, either directly affecting mutation rates or even through epigenetics and that sort of thing. So I think it's a perfectly reasonable hypothesis. And the idea that Tony brings forward is that, we've sort of, we've evolved into a place where we're actually in a neurodegenerative state now with the deterioration of the human diet and all that. Many fewer fruits, more meat, more synthetic processed food, all of that kind of stuff.
GMOs
and GMOs, all of these things have an influence on the quality of our diet and the quality of, you are what you eat. Right? I mean, it's a common cliche, but it really is true. What you take into your body from plants or animals is what your body is made of. And, so the processes that Tony is talking about, again, are they're coevolutionary processes. They take place over large amounts of time, but I think that there's some validity to what he is talking about.
I mean, it's interesting to look at the larger perspective of where things are headed, how people seem to be behaving, and just looking. I mean, in the information age, I mean that's where we are now, and where I can transmit at close to light speed, across the world, a tweet or something like that, and instantly make aware, so many people about a certain topic. But, what seems to be important is just the most trivial, it doesn't really matter to your everyday life, like what the Kardashians are wearing, or, it's something like that. It's nauseating.
Right. Well, this is I mean I think this is you point out, this is the two-edged nature of these kinds of technologies. I mean, I like being able to hold in my hand an instrument that will let me tap into probably 90% of human knowledge. If I'm persistent enough, you can get a lot of useful information out of these things. Unfortunately, that's mostly not what people use them for. People, it's not clear. I don't, people value their tribe, they value their group, and these communication devices like social media and so on, they seem to reinforce our tribalism rather than facilitating communicating outside our tribal comfort zone. I'm not sure. Is it the instrument, or is it human nature? I tend to think it's human nature. I think that, I say again and again, technologies don't have moral qualities. Humans have moral qualities, and it's all about the decisions that we make about how to behave toward each other, how to utilize these technologies. They can all be utilized for beneficial purposes. They can also be utilized for destructive purposes, and what we lack, we're very clever in what we can invent, these devices, what they can do. We're not very clever in how we use them. So there's a disjunct that has arisen between our innate wisdom, which I don't think you can get from an external source necessarily, and our cleverness. We're very, very clever. We are not very wise. That's the problem. We have too much of the technology, the mindset that, we can do these things, therefore we will do these things, we should do these things. And we don't have the wisdom to step back and say, is this really a good idea? And that applies to things like, AI and genetic engineering and, all of these tremendously powerful technologies that we can manipulate, which have the potential to be extremely beneficial, but also completely destructive if we misuse them. Where is the wisdom in, where is the wisdom that we can bring to bear on that, and either how to use it in beneficial ways, or how to make a conscious decision. Let's don't do that. Let's not use it. Even though we can do it, let's don't do it. And that takes a lot of courage, and it takes moral insight to come to that conclusion.
Well, the time is now. It's not like we can wait around and figure this out later. It's time to create awareness now, and it's not just talking about it. It's actually going out and doing it. You create the awareness, and you demonstrate that you understand what the problem is, which is that the planet is dying. If we don't do something about this now, like now, like 10 years ago, then, I mean, I think it was Terence that said that, you know, we would hand our children's children the bones of a dying world.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what's happening.
Wow.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So, I mean, that's why this academy that you're creating is so important, you know, and things like this. And, you know, I feel like our mission collectively is the same. We're aligned in this idea of, you know, I don't know, collectively helping the planet, each other, you know, escaping this sort of result of, you know, extinction, I guess. Yeah.
The Academy, like I said, it's a catalytic nexus for the transformation of global consciousness. So it is a place that is, you know, in the spirit of Eleusis. Eleusis was the longest lived and really one of the last of the mystery religions. And, you know, the Academy is founded in that spirit, you know, to be a place where you can bring the best minds on the planet together with the help of plant medicines, help people understand, reframe their relationship to nature and to each other, and hopefully come away with some solutions. So it's a kind of a think tank, I guess. It's an academy, but the think tank is, you know, to me the term implies that, well, you know, you have all these educational activities, you put out reports, you do these things, but you're kind of scratching your own belly button. You know, you're not really having any impact. I want the Academy to be different in the sense that it can be a nexus. It can be a place where brilliant minds can come together and try to come up with solutions, and not only brilliant, but also influential. You know, bring people together, bring people there to have these transformational experiences, much for the same reasons that people went to Eleusis. You know, this was a lifetime experience that you had, you were expected to have, and it you know, it was an influence for your worldview for the rest of your life. That's what I want the Academy to be, a place where people of influence, power, and brilliance can come and, you know, confront our existential situation, look at it from a different perspective with the help of plant medicines, and try to come up with some creative answers. You know, so it's important that people share this, but then the next step is what do you do when you leave the retreat? What do you do when you go home? And some people are in a position to make some big changes.
I mean, I really hope so, you know, and I mean, as it says in this brochure, there are illnesses of the spirit and the soul, and you know, the plant teachers, it's what's teaching us, you know, it's showing us ourselves and uncovering that. I like to think of it as, you know, like in your mind there being a closet, and, you know, like you haven't opened this door for years, and, you know, when you drink ayahuasca or have one of these compounds, it kind of forces you, or encourages you to open that door and turn on that light in this dark space, and then pulls out, you know, one by one, all these traumas and things that you've pushed away, you know, like you've let manifest into disease and, you know, PTSD or anxiety or, you know, panic disorders, or so many mental things that are going on in the body. But I think primarily it's a connection to the spirit world where it are the roots of you know, where these problems occur, and that's what we need to look at, and that's what plants give us the technology to do.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, it's interesting. Psychedelics, you know, I do say they're medicines for the soul in a certain way. They are they speak to us at the collective level. They speak to us at the species level, at the cultural level, and at the individual level, right? And that's kind of interesting. They are medicines for all of these things. As a species, we are wounded, and as a culture, we are wounded. And you can't live in this culture without being wounded. Psychedelics can address all of that, from the individual level to the collective level, to the species level. They've always been there. They've always been capable of that. And this has long been recognized by, indigenous people who have been kind of the stewards of this knowledge. Now the rest of us have to acknowledge it and get on board with it. If we can, if you can persuade people. But, it's dismaying, it's dismaying that things like reason, and truth and this sort of thing are not necessarily respected anymore. I mean, we live in a world of, memes, and many of the memes are false and deliberately made to be that way. So I'm not sure how you overcome that.
I mean, was there, we're going to wrap here soon, Dennis, but was there a reason that you picked the Sacred Valley of Peru for the location? I mean, it's a beautiful place.
Well, that's a good reason, right there. Yeah, it's one of the most spectacular places that I've ever been to, just in terms of the energy that's there. It's in the heart of the plant medicine tradition. That's also a big reason that not only is there ayahuasca, but there are these other shamanic medicines that are used. So there's a tradition around it. It's also, in some ways, it's a microcosm of what is happening on the planet. I mean, even though the Sacred Valley is a beautiful place and, all of these things are going on, it also has its own environmental issues, due to climate change, shrinkage of the glaciers and this sort of thing. So partly, it's not exactly isolated, but many people maybe think of it as isolated. It's a kind of a Shangri-La in a certain way. It is a, mountain retreat. I mean, the factors that led me to, focus on the Sacred Valley are as much personal as anything else, because I've been going there for quite a while now. I love it. And I've been working at this guest house there with my retreats, a place called Wilkatika, which is an ideal location if we ever are able to afford to buy a physical campus or acquire a physical location for the academy. Hopefully this would be the place. But just for a combination of personal preference and also the fact that in some ways it's a microcosm of the rest of the world. So it's a place where people can come and share these experiences and also get the cultural experience, of the Incas who, and the pre-Incas. I mean, this was a society that worked pretty well, and to the degree that any society works. There's a lot to admire about the Incan, pre-Incan cultures. So, there was not any one thing that made me focus on the Sacred Valley.
Dennis, I appreciate your time so much and your presence. I always enjoy, having these conversations. It's been a while since we kind of caught up. I'm so glad that we had you here, and I'm so thankful that you're creating this organization to, further spread this. It seems like this will be, a huge part of your legacy, and really wish it the most success in the world. Where can people find more information about the Academy What is our website?
Well, yes, our website is under construction. We're building it as rapidly as we can. We've received some donations, a little bit of seed money that's going to let us go ahead with that. So they can always look at www.mckenna.academy. And that will take you to the home page, such as it is. If people are interested in our retreats or the events, right now the best way to find out about those is to send a message to events@mckenna.academy. And my assistant, Christina, who handles registrations and so on, will get back to you right away with an email and tell you, for example, about this retreat we've got happening in November and anything else that happens to be on the agenda. So numerous ways, and eventually within a couple of weeks, we should have at least a basic website up and open. So
perfect. I mean, so this is all happening as we speak, and it should be more concrete as time develops, and it's there as a resource for people very soon. And I'm glad that you were able to put this together. I think that's it. I mean, is there?
I've got some great people working with me. It's not just me. It's got my name on it, but we're a collective effort, and I've got some really creative, beautiful people working on this with me. So
cool.
Yeah. So stay tuned,
guys. That's gonna do us for HXP, the show today. I hope you guys enjoyed this. It was really fun to talk to Dennis and get his perspective. It's quite sobering, but I mean, this is the reality that we're in and that we're facing. So it's important that we acknowledge it and recognize it and take action, do something about it. If you're listening to this on the podcast version, get to YouTube, subscribe to us on YouTube, click the notification bell so that you get notified when we go live. And if you're feeling generous, get to iTunes and subscribe to us on iTunes and leave us a review. One of the things that I hear the most is that most people have no idea that we exist, and they find our show and they see all the guests that we've interviewed, and they're stunned that they hadn't found us before. So the biggest compliment that you can give us is by recommending us to your friends and your family and the people that you care about. Thank you so much for listening and your presence. Without that, the show would not be possible. We will see you next week.